Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So I wanted to talk to you today about the top 20 herbaceous plant species, specifically for naturescaping your yard. As Ethan mentioned, this is a follow-up to my talk a couple weeks ago about naturescaping. I'm going to talk about lots of different flowering plants, grasses, as well as sedges that you can incorporate into your yard and landscape that will bring a plethora of birds, insects, and other wildlife to your home during the growing season. I wanted to make sure before our plant sale on the 22nd, we talked about herbaceous plants. So typically in a design setting, you actually want to talk about and place your woody plants first, so your trees and your shrubs. But just to make sure you had time and thought before the plant sale, which is going to be solely herbaceous plant species, I wanted to talk about those first, so you could write down your thoughts and ideas. So before we get into it, let's do a little bit of a review. Naturescaping is a method of landscape design that focuses on that harmonization for coexistence of humans and nature in a space, like your backyard. To naturescape, we have to understand the basic habitat needs of wildlife. Habitat is both the landscape and the biological conditions that create space, food, cover, water, all essentials to having that effective habitat creation. We're going to focus on native plants because they are the food source for your backyard wildlife. Why? As I talked about a couple weeks ago, native plants and the vegetation provide food for 10 to 15 times more wildlife than non-native introduced plants. Last time I talked about, or I used the metaphor, a bowl of plastic fruit. So a backyard filled with non-native introduced plants is basically a bowl of plastic fruit. Many, if not most, introduced plants succeed here in North America, even become invasive because of their unpalatability to insects and wildlife. When I was in school working on towards my bachelor's degree in landscape design, the Plant Bible book was the acclaimed Ornamental Plants that Michael Durr wrote. In it, Michael repeatedly emphasizes species that are pest-free, meaning these plants will not be visited by monarch butterflies laying eggs upon the leaves, or mason bees foraging flowers, goldfinches seeking seeds to build up their fat reserves for the winter months. Non-native introduced plants are pieces of plastic fruit. 2 weeks ago, a gentleman, Chris, mentioned that planting some of our native sunflower species had aphids foraging on them. So native aphids love our native sunflowers. Do you know what animal loves aphids? Ants. Ants farm aphids. Aphids feed on the sap of the plants, then secrete out a liquid poo called honeydew, which is favored by ants as a food source. Which animals eat ants? Birds, right? We've got woodpeckers, actually our downy woodpeckers. It's the craziest thing. They'll swoop down, and during the summer months, they actually will eat the ants crawling across our driveway. It's incredible. It's like National Geographic. Turkeys, snakes, beetles, etc. It can't be emphasized enough the importance of insect herbivores to the health of an ecosystem. Therefore, we really need to welcome insect herbivores if we're going to bring our feathered and or furry friends into our backyards. All that said, native plants are also adapted to our local soil and climate conditions. So kind of a no-brainer. I want to begin talking about one of the most important plant genera in, dare I say, North America, certainly Wisconsin, it's right up there, the goldenrods. So there are 125 species of goldenrods that occur throughout the United States. These are perennial deciduous plants, so they go dormant in the wintertime. Depending on the species, they can grow to be 2 to 6 feet tall. They produce their famous yellow flower heads from August to November. Some species love the full sun, others shade. They grow in sandy soils, rocky soils, clay soils. You name it, there's a species for that spot. They enjoy being in moist areas, dry areas, floodplains, upland forests, savannas, seepages. You know, they grow in developed, disturbed, or abandoned areas, so fields, lots, under power lines. In fall, their flowering stems actually turn a beautiful russety color, so color consistently, be it from the flower head or the tissue itself. A wide variety of insects visit the flowers for both the pollen and the nectar. Long-tongued bees, short-tongued bees, carpenter bees, andrenid bees actually specialize on goldenrods, wasps, flies, be they tachinid flies, syrphid flies, low flies, flesh flies. There are just over 100 species of butterfly and moth caterpillars that use goldenrods as their host plant for their larvae. We often see this common insect attribute. There's a goldenrod gall fly that lays its, or inserts its ovipositor into the stem of the goldenrods, lays its egg, and the larvae live in this gall forming structure on the stems of the goldenrod. Other insects that feed on the plant, blister beetles. We've got some owlets, some leaf hoppers, white-tailed deer, even rabbits can occasionally feed on the foliage. In the floodplain area, folks have noted beavers and muskrats actually using the stems of goldenrod to build their dams and their dens. Birds that visit it, goldfinches, swamp swallows, jays, wrens, woodpeckers, vireos, waxwings, warblers, titmouse, all feed on the goldenrod seed heads. The two species I want to talk about, the first is showy goldenrod. It grows on a rather stout stem with smooth leaves, bearing this really beautiful pyramidal or maybe club-like terminal cluster of yellow flowers. It is one of the showiest, hence the name, goldenrods of the species here in the United States. Prefers sun and is really adaptable to the soil type, especially in the Milwaukee area. The plant itself will grow anywhere from 2 to even 5 feet tall. It is a clump forming species, so it will not spread rhizomatously, so through underground roots or stolons above the ground roots, it tends to grow in its clump form. That's not to say that you can't get seedlings cropping up from the seeds that fall and are distributed by an original plant, but the original plant itself has a clump forming habit. The bloom time is in September. The second species I want to talk about is the blue-stemmed goldenrod. Not an aggressive species either. It's typically found in our woodlands and forests here in Milwaukee County. They have these unique, almost graceful arch-like stems with hundreds of yellow flowers. If you take a look at the image on the right, let me see if I can move you can see some of those arching branches. And it's called blue-stemmed goldenrod because of a powdery, purpley blue gloom that surrounds the stems, giving it that bluish purple hue. So blue-stemmed goldenrod. It is incredibly attractive to our woodland butterflies, bees, and even a parasitic wasp. The plant itself will grow to be 2 feet tall and about 2 feet wide. Again, a clump forming goldenrod. The bloom time is from August through September. All right, another famous set of plants. The Asteraceae family is a huge family. I want to hone in on more of those true asters. There are over 30 species of asters, true asters in Wisconsin, and they're an invaluable plant in the planting bed. They are durable, they are long-lived. From September, we have just a burst of flower color, be it purple, shades of blue, pink, white, all blending together and lasting really up until the end of the growing season. The flower heads tend to be on branched stems in clusters of both ray and disc flowers. I actually have some arrows here. So we've got our disc flowers in the center and the rays. Many of our native asters grow in woodlands and understories, as well as out in the full sun. So again, like the goldenrods, we have a plethora of options. Depending on the species, they can grow in wet to dry soils, loam, clay loam, sand, rocky material. Many asters, when they get to a point in the growing season where we're dry, their lower leaves tend to wither up and crinkle, even falling off, giving them what in the horticulture industry we call ugly legs. So I often recommend to folks planting asters is to use them as the mid or the background plants, so you can plant plants in front of them and hide those ugly legs. Oftentimes too, it can help hold up some of the heavy branching stems that tend to droop a bit when we either get rain or as we progress further into the season with more and more flowers, they just get heavy. Some of the visitors, well, there's over 15 different orders of insects that visit asters. Over 40 different lepidopteran species use this, the aster species as their host plant for their caterpillars. We have cross-pollination by honeybees, halictidae bees, bumblebees, syrphid flies, tachinid flies, skippers, moths. Both the nectar and the pollen are available as floral rewards. So the pollen itself is packed with protein, and the nectar is a sugary, sweet liquid drink. There are more than 6 native bee species that are pollinator specialists to asters. Some of the other insects that are associated with them, beetles, larvae of fruit flies, leaf mining flies, plant bugs, lace bugs. In general, asters are less important to vertebrate species, but the songbirds that do visit them include wrens, cardinals, waxwings, finches, nuthatches, sparrows, orioles. Some of you may have also experienced or seen wild turkeys eating asters. They feed on the foliage as well as the seeds. The two species I want to talk about, the first is the Shorts aster. This is a really attractive shade-loving aster. The stems are round and fairly slender. A distinguishing feature of this species is the leaf margins are actually smooth, distinguishing it from a lot of the other woodland asters, which have a toothed leaf edge. The central stem holds these clusters of compound flowers where you'll see the pale blue-violet rays, and then the yellow discs that actually age to more of a pinky purple color. You can see that in the image on the left. The plant itself, a clump-forming aster, grows to be 1 to 3 feet tall and about 1 foot wide. In Washington Park, they are really beautiful and just striking when you plant multiple in one space. It creates this beautiful mass because, again, they tend to stay in their 1 foot bubble. Bloom time is from late September through late October. So a really late bloomer that gives you good color and good foraging for wildlife. The second, there we go. The second aster would be the bluestem aster, another very hardy aster that kind of defies the frost, blooming oftentimes into November. Lavender blue, I guess star-like, star-shaped flowers with that yellow center that becomes reddish after pollination. The leaves are a distinguishing feature of this species. As the name implies, they are smooth, different to a lot of most of our other asters. This plant grows to be 1 to 3 feet tall and about 1 to 3 feet wide. What I mean by that, when you see a range of size, it's really referencing where the environmental conditions that the plant is growing in. So if it's growing in less ideal conditions, the plant tends to be a little bit smaller. So more of that 1 foot by 1 foot range. In more of the preferred conditions, it's going to get taller, it's going to spread wider. So that's why you often see this range. It tolerates moist soil conditions, dry soil conditions, sun. I've pushed it into partial shade and does beautifully. Bloom time, September, again, up until sometimes November. Violets, I think a little underrated in our landscape scene, so I wanted to talk about them. There are over 20 species in Wisconsin. They are not visited by a lot of our pollinating insects, but they can attract some bees and some of the syrphid flies. For that reason, violets have evolved to have cleistogamous flowers. So cleistogamy, it describes self-pollination of a flower that really remains closed. The opposite of cleistogamy is chastogamy. These are most of the flowers that we're familiar with. They open, we have visitors that pollinate them, they produce a seed. So violets have both, chastogamous and cleistogamous. And most botanists agree that the violets produce these cleistogamous flowers below the leaves to really ensure reproduction. While we don't have familiar pollinating insects visiting them, the violet flowers do have 29 species of butterflies and moths that use the plant as a caterpillar host. Caterpillars of many of our fritillaria butterflies feed on the foliage. The seeds from the chastogamous flowers have this little soft appendage called an iliosome, My red arrow is pointing to it on the screen there. It's really attractive to ants. So ants often are the distributors of violet seeds. The iliosome itself, it's this little appendage attached to the seed. It's a cocktail of fatty acids, proteins, and sugar. So it's consumed by ants and slugs. Some of the birds that come and visit are mourning doves, wild turkeys. I've even run documents talking about the white-footed mouse visiting. In Washington Park, I know that the deer and the rabbits really love the foliage too. So that's something to bear in mind. The two violets I wanted to talk to you about are the prairie violet and the downy wood violet. The prairie violet, it's not an aggressive violet and therefore a really nice urban backyard plant. The flowers are blue violet or pale blue with white hairs on the lower side near the throat of the flower. This particular violet can and does rebloom in the fall if weather conditions are favorable. It prefers sun but can tolerate shade, mostly of herbaceous plants. So I wouldn't recommend planting it under a tree or shrubs. Leave it to more of the open sunny spaces where you're planting other herbaceous perennials. It tolerates moist to dry soils with rich organic material. In natural areas, the prairie violet is an indicator of high quality or even remnant prairies. It grows to be 3 to 6 inches tall and 3 to 6 inches in spread. Bloom time is now, so April through about June. And then again, if the conditions are favorable, it'll bloom again in September. The downy wood violet, a really soft, hairy violet found in our woodlands and forests. It has a really pretty purple veined coloration near the throat of the flower. Soil conditions, it can grow in moist to dry soils, again, preferring shade or part shade. A taller species than our prairie violet, about 9 to 12 inches in height, 9 usually just the foliage, and then the flowers emerge above the foliage, giving it that added height of the 12 inches. So 9 to 12 inches tall, certainly that spread as well. They tend to colonize, so anticipate at least a foot of spread, if not eventually a colony underfoot. Geraniums, one of my favorites. We have 2 species of geranium that are native to Milwaukee County, Geranium maculatum and Geranium bignellii. I am recommending the Geranium maculatum. Move my, there we go. So the wild geranium is an incredibly versatile plant, grows in full sun to full shade, enjoys moderately moist to even dry and wet soil conditions. If you go up to Saukville area and you have some of the tamarack floodplains, you can actually see the wild geranium blooming within the wet spaces. And yet, if you go out to Eagle and some of the southern kettle moraine spaces where the soil tends to be a bit drier, you too will find your wild geranium growing and blooming beautifully. Pale purple flowers in fall. This tends to happen in the more dry soil conditions, but the foliage can actually turn a russety red with flecks of purple and orange. It's gorgeous. One of these years, I'll be able to take a picture and be able to share it. The plant itself will grow to be about 12 inches tall and spread at least 12 to even 20 inches wide, especially in bloom. They get these nice roundy, moundy shapes to them when they're in bloom. Bloom time, usually late April through May. There are 24 species of butterflies and moths that use the geranium as a caterpillar host. Bumblebees, mason bees, cuckoo bees, halictidae bees. The andrenid bee is a specialist, or we have one species that is a specialist to the wild geranium. Fun fact about syrphid flies that visit the geranium. So syrphid fly adults need flowers for nectar and pollen. They are attracted to plants with that are infected with aphids. So the female will lay her egg on a leaf or a shoot near an aphid colony. The larvae emerge and will feed on the aphids and other insects moving around the plant. They complete their full development in about 2-3 weeks, and then if you're lucky, they'll have actually consumed, or if they're lucky, they'll have consumed about 400 species or 400 aphids each. So an eating machine. Other insects include stink bugs, plant bugs. Some of the invertebrate, or some of the vertebrates are chipmunks. Deer will actually nibble on some of the foliage. Oftentimes when we go seed collecting, we'll be looking for seed, and you'll see a chomped stem, and you know, it's the deer. The next species I want to talk about is the lead plant. Beautiful plant, prefers full sun and moist to dry soils. No particular soil type. They're pretty adaptable. They can grow in loamy soils, sandy soils, gravel, even clay soils. It's a legume, so it adds nitrogen to your soil. Easy to grow, but slow to develop. At Washington Park, I've noticed it usually takes about 3 years for them to mature and put on enough growth to flower. Many people consider it to be a shrubby plant or semi-woody plant because of the rigidness to its stems and the fact that it lingers or has a presence tissue-wise all year round. The common name, lead plant, refers to the once held belief that the plant was an indicator of the presence of lead in the ground. The plant itself grows to be about 2 to 3 feet tall and about that wide as well. So spread is 2 to 3 feet as well. Blooming June through July. The flowers of the lead plant are attractive to an assortment of bees and wasps, bumblebees, leafcutter bees. I've got an image here, the andrenid bee. Again, there is a species that is an obligate to the lead plant. 25 species of butterflies and moths use the lead plant species as their caterpillar host. Those include painted ladies, the red admirals, sulfurs, etc. I had to include this photograph of the moth. It's so beautiful. Other insects feed on the foliage. The flowers include grasshoppers, broadhead bugs, leaf beetles. Birds that visit the lead plant are goldfinches, sparrows, titmouse, and juncos. Again, they're looking for the seeds of the lead plant. Using this image here, I'm going to transition to our next plant. We've got our lead plant in the foreground and the black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckias in the background. We have 5 Rudbeckia species native to Wisconsin. 4 are native to Milwaukee County. Some are persisting perennials. Others are biennials or short-lived perennials. The brown-eyed Susan, there it is often self-pollinated, but it nonetheless attracts a plethora of nectar-seeking insects. We've got carpenter bees, digger bees, leafcutter bees, halictidae, all visiting the rudbeckias. We have syrphid flies, wasps, bee flies, goldenrod soldier beetles, 16 species of butterflies and moths. I'm going to give the birds a little bit of visual credit here. We've got the northern cardinals visit, downy woodpeckers, goldfinches, just to name a few, really. The species that I want to hone in and recommend is the brown-eyed Susan, pictured here. Really daisy-like, smaller sized flowers that are yellow with a brownish purple center. Incredibly floriferous, so tons of flowers bloom on the branched structure of the stalks. And often they bloom for like 1 to 2 months. It should be noted, these are biennial or short-lived perennials. So what I've noticed is you'll have your initial plant that you plant, and after a few years, it will disappear, but its offspring are emerging just beside it. So you may notice within the landscape a few plants hopping and jumping. Note that that's very normal. It's part of its natural process. The plant grows to be 1 to even like 3 feet tall. When I'm walking through the Prairie at Washington Park, they're about hip height, and will spread 1 to 2 feet. Again, offspring will emerge beside the parents, blooming from late August through October. The second, and preferring full sun, full sun and a range of soil types, be it moisture level or type. So clay soils, sandy soils, moist soils to dry soils. Usually you won't find them in wet areas, not that particular species. The sweet black-eyed Susan actually prefers full sun to even part shade or shade. It's one of the most shade tolerant black-eyed Susans that we have. Often you'll see them in openings of woodlands, so where the sunlight can actually penetrate down to the ground level. You'll often see the sweet black-eyed Susan. It does best in moist soils, rather rich conditions. Very easy to cultivate. The plant produces, again, a branch structure for its flowers. They don't have as many flowers as the brown-eyed Susan, but they're larger in size. Each individual flower tends to be larger in size. The plant will grow to be about 2 to 4 feet tall and spread about 2 to 4 feet, blooming in July, usually July through September. False indigo or baptisia, beautiful plant, prefers full sun and moist to even slightly dry soil conditions. They tend to produce a really deep taproot. They tolerate a variety of soil types, so loam, clay, gravel, sand. The plant is not fussy. It just takes a little bit of time to grow and establish. So oftentimes you'll plant it and you'll see one little shoot come up for the first 2, even 3 years. After that, it begins to add girth to its to the space that it occupies. So sends up multiple stems. Also a legume, so it will increase or add nitrogen to your soil. It's an incredibly long-lived plant. The insects that visit it, we've got our worker bumblebees that will pollinate the flowers. 14 species of butterflies and moths use the plant as their caterpillar host. We've got the duskwing, we've got the dogface, orange sulfurs. Let's see, we've got weevils that actually come in and visit. I consider them to be a little bit of a pest because I oftentimes want the seed, but you'll often find weevils within the black capsules with the seeds. They're nibbling away, having a feast on the seeds within the pods themselves. It should be noted, the plant itself is toxic. I had an internship down in Duke, North Carolina at the University's Botanic Gardens, and the native plant curator of the garden had some bacteria at home. His young son looked at the pods and thought, oh, that's like a pea pod. So actually ate one of the green pods and went catatonic for about 30 minutes. So they rushed him to the hospital and were able to get him to pass the plant tissue. It was a very scary moment, but a good realization that not every legume is edible. So bear that in mind. No eating this legume. Bee balm or monarda, so also known as wild bergamot. It's a very common wildflower used often in the landscape. We have 2 native species of monarda and 1 escapee from Illinois. Monarda has a dense, rounded cluster of lavender flowers that form at the tip. Each flower is tubular and has 2 lips, with the lower lip forming a nice little platform for the insect pollinators. The sweat bee just seems to, he's honing in on the pollen. It's classified in the mint family and has square stems, typical of those in the mint family. And the leaves, of course, have tiny glands that allow that aromatic oil to exude itself when it's touched or brushed. Bee balm grows in moist to dry woods, prairies, fields, roadsides. It prefers full sun to partial shade. Its growth is really luxuriant in moist and rich soils. In sandier, drier soils, it tends to shoot up 1 or 2 stems. It too, under dry conditions, can actually get a powdery mildew. So I oftentimes plant it or use it in more of the background of my planting beds. The plant itself will grow to be 2 to about 5 feet tall. It can colonize, so producing a 2 to 5 foot space by just planting 1 individual. It blooms from July through September. Oops, I went a little fast there. July through September. Shoot, is that working? Nope. Okay, never mind. Let's move on to the next one. Milkweeds. Now that I've given you a taste of the next plant. So Asclepius. I wanted to take a moment to talk about how many different species of milkweeds we have. Oftentimes we just hear about the common milkweed, but it should be noted that we have 14 different species of milkweeds, and they are visited by many insects, including the monarch. 5 of our milkweed species are actually deemed rare or designated rare by the DNR. A rare plant, if you were to define it, is really, it's the scarcity of a total population of the species. So the total population of the species may just have a few individuals, or they might be restricted to a small geographic range, so a single county or a hilltop. Our rare Milkweed species include the green milkweed, the woolly milkweed, dwarf milkweed, purple milkweed, and prairie milkweed. Milkweeds are famous for their association with monarchs. As many of you might know, the monarchs are specialists on the milkweed. They only lay their eggs on the milkweed. Wisconsin happens to be in the core breeding ground for their eastern migration, which is why we have the opportunity to help them along and see them feeding and producing several generations on the milkweed itself. Our milkweeds, some of the key characteristics: each flower consists of 5 sepals, petals, hoods. There we go. And some species even have little horns. So the red circle there is a circle of that hood and with the horn coming out. They have opposite leaves, milky juices, and oftentimes very prominent looking pods. The 2 species I want to share with you or encourage you to grow in your space is the butterfly milkweed. They prefer full sun, moist to dry soil conditions, be they rocky or sandy. We do have some strains of this plant that grow in clay soils, so long as they're well drained and there isn't standing water. This plant can develop slowly, but is an incredibly long-lived plant, excellent in sunny spaces, and very tolerant of dry weather once it's established. The height of the plant grows to be 2 to 3 feet tall and about that wide. Bloom time, July through September. The second species is poke milkweed, and I wanted to talk about this one because it actually grows in our woodlands. So ideally, it's grown in partial to full shade, mesic soil conditions, rich, loamy soil. If it's sandy, ideally there's some organic material that it can pull nutrients from. The plant itself grows to be about 3 feet tall, depending on the moisture level. I have seen it growing to about shoulder height, which is 5 feet for me. Spread 2 feet, a nice clump forming milkweed. Both of these milkweed species are clump forming versus colonial, so they don't have underground rhizomes where they're expanding exponentially. The flowers of the poke milkweed are especially attractive to bumblebees and butterflies, the swallowtail just as much as the monarch and some of our fritillarias. Oh yes, some fantastic images. All right, next plant, the beard tongue, penstemon. Wisconsin has 5 native species of beard tongue and 1 escapee from Illinois. I want to recommend to you the hairy beard tongue. It has open clusters of these trumpet-like in colors and shades from deep purple to even white. It's one of the earliest blooming beard tongue and has really distinctive hairy stems. Some of the other beard tongue have hairy stems, but this one is especially distinctive. It prefers moist to even mildly wet soil conditions. I have seen it growing in dry, sandy soils as well. Plant. Sunlight levels also variable. You can push it into part shade. Ideally, it's growing in full sun. The height of the plant, 6 inches when in bloom, more like 12, and it will spread about 12 inches as well. Bloom time is usually late May through June. There are 10 species of butterflies and moths that actually use beard tongue as their host plant for their caterpillars. Many of our checker spotted butterflies use this. All right. 6 species are native to Wisconsin. Some of the other common names: prairie blazing star, cattail, gay feather, all are herbaceous perennials. And nearly half of the plant is a flower spike. So it's an awesome plant to have in your backyard. They produce rayless rose purple colored flower heads that bloom downward. Oftentimes they've got very fine hairs and a leafy stem. The plants prefer full sun, depending on the species, dry to moist soil conditions. A lot of the fauna associations are bees, be they honeybees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, miner bees. 8 species of butterflies and moths use it as a caterpillar host plant. Let's see, we've got mammalian herbivores, deer, rabbits will often eat at the stems. My parents actually have the deer digging up the corms. The bulbous structure, underground structure of the plant, so they have to do a little bit of caging if they want to see any of theirs. The National Audubon Society has determined the following bird species to visit. The blazing stars is waxwings, hummingbirds, vireos, sparrows, orioles, some of the thrashers. I want to share with you this species, the meadow blazing star. It is one of the sturdier perennials of the Liatris genus. Has very upright central stalks. The stems often have a reddish hue to them with short little hairs. The leaves are long and lance-like, most of which are at the base of the plant. It blooms again from the top downwards in that progression. So the tippy top flowers bloom first, and as the bloom matures, those the buds open downward. This particular species grows really well in loamy clay to even clay soils. It prefers moist soils. It can tolerate some wetness in its feet so long as there's not standing water. The plant will grow to be 1 to 3 feet tall. I have some in the orchard of Washington Park that get to be shoulder height, so 5 feet. Stays nice and clumpy in its 1 foot space, blooming from late August through October. And I couldn't, not show you. Oops. Sorry, everyone, I'll just keep going. I couldn't not show you these images of some of the moths and their caterpillars that visit the Liatris. Hopefully we're still going here. Okay, next plant, the bone set, Eupatorium perfoliatum. Many plant species, there are several plant species in the Eupatorium genus. I want to hone in on perfoliatum. So this particular plant grows in moist soil conditions, tends to produce a nice flat, rounded head of white flowers, nice, long, hairy stems. You can even see it in images here with these perfoliate leaves. So these leaves that tend to clasp the central stem. This particular plant grows to be 3 to 4 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, blooming in July through September. The nectar and pollen of the flowers are really attractive to bees, flies, wasps, beetles. We have 28 species of butterflies and moths that visit Eupatorium. We've got the tiger moths, some of the borer moths. Lots of birds and other fauna also visit our Eupatorium. Look at that long ovipositor. Okay, next plant. I could not talk about the sunflowers. So helianthus. Helianthus tuberosus. So helianthus, the name derived from two Greek words, helios, meaning the sun, and anthos, flower, in reference to the perception or supposed tendency of the plant to follow the sun. Helianthus are really easy to grow and can grow in a variety of soil conditions and types. They mostly prefer the sun, but we have species that can tolerate shade and is found in our woodlands. They can be quite aggressive. So knowing where you want to plant them and that they will move is something to bear in mind. A beautiful plant for the background of your planting beds. Its value for wildlife is something that goes beyond and can't be forgotten. So it really, I had to mention it. The nectar and pollen of the flowers are attractive to bees, Halictidae bees, Andrenid bees, cuckoo bees, bumblebees. Other insects are syrphid flies, bee flies. We've got wasps, beetles, over 65 butterfly and moth species. We'll use helianthus as the host plant. That includes checker spots, the painted ladies, some of our borer moths. We've got leaf beetles, aphids, tree hoppers, you name it. The insects visit the helianthus. The species I wanted to talk about was the Jerusalem artichoke, ornamentally grown for its attractive late summer to fall flowers. But in a vegetable garden, the tubers that the plant produces are edible. The tubers don't have starch, so they have this really mild artichoke-like flavor to them. The Jerusalem artichoke has been a really important food plant for Native Americans for many years prior to the 1600s. I've grown it quite a few times in my vegetable garden, and I can get anywhere from like 2 to 5 pounds, depending on how many plants I'm planting. Plants are usually, you harvest the tubers about 2 weeks after the flowers have started to fade. So it has a really fun ethnobotanic function or feature to it. The tubers, you can grate them raw, put them in salads, or you could roast them. This particular plant has green to reddish stems. Often they're a little bit hairy. There's some variation across populations, whether the leaves are opposite or alternate in arrangement, which can be a little confusing with ID. There also can be a bit of hybridization that's occurring. All in all, the Jerusalem artichoke has really big leaves. So about 9 inches long and 3 to 4 inches across. Branching flower stem structure, golden yellow flower heads, both disc and ray flowers, growing to be 4 to even 10 feet tall and about that wide, blooming from August through October. Some of our furry friends. We're approaching the end here. We've got our little bluestem. I could not talk about two non-floriferous plants here. The little bluestem is a wonderful plant used quite often in in the landscape. So little bluestem, an iconic warm season grass, typically found in prairies and savannas. The tissue itself during the growing season is a bluish greenish color, and then in fall, as you can see in the photos, the leaf tissue turns a nice russety red. You even get little flecks of blue and purple in it. The grass gets little tufts of the white seed. You can see at the left image there, the seed head, which is really interesting and used often by fauna. Grows best in full sun to part shade, a wide range of soil types, anywhere from mesic or moist to dry. It hasn't done well for me in wet, really wet conditions. The plant itself will grow to be 1 to about 2.5 feet tall when it's got full seed head, and produces that really nice clump in 1 to about 2 feet of space. The little bluestem is an excellent plant for wildlife. There are more than 5 species of butterflies and moths that use it as a host plant. Other insects that feed on the little bluestem are grasshoppers and walking sticks, some of our leaf mining beetles, thrips, spittlebugs. The seeds of the grass are eaten by songbirds, and little bluestem actually provides overwintering habitat and resources for the birds and some of our queen bumblebees. So the queen bumblebees tend to bunch up and nest under our bunch grasses like little bluestem, and then will emerge this time of year. Ethan and I were just talking about seeing queens. The last plant is the Pennsylvania sedge. A perennial plant, a sedge, not a grass. So it's not in the grass family, it has its own family. It produces these really clumpy, loose tufts of alternate leaves. The sheaths of the Pennsylvania sedge are green, prefers shade, so dappled shade to even full shade, mesic to dry soil conditions, so long as there's good drainage. It can grow in various soil types, so sandy, clay, loam, ideally where there's organic matter. So leaving your leaf debris around is good for the Pennsylvania sedge. The plant itself grows from 1/2 inch to about 1 inch in height. When it's in bloom, you often see it more like that 3 to 5 inches, but otherwise droopy, cascading tissue, and it tends to colonize. That's what it does in natural oak woodlands. You can see that image on the right there of the sedge sort of colonizing the understory of our forests and woodlands. Insects are known to feed on the pen sedge tissue, leafhoppers, aphids, grasshoppers. There's larvae of grass miner moths. Various birds will actually eat the seeds of the sedge. Wild turkeys, ruffed grouse, tuies, some of the sparrows. All in all, the sedge is a beautiful plant to use in our shade gardens, giving it a really graceful, elegant look as an understory covering. Some folks I want to thank for all the great imagery that I was permitted to use. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Any questions?